All right, I'll make sure that only one mic is off and you guys can hear me all well. Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming today. Just as a little start, there have been some really great talks these last couple days, and it's been an honor to join and listen and be a part of this, and it's been a pretty cool thing. There's definitely things that I'm going to say it that I agree with, and there are definitely things that I don't agree with. So over the course of today, I would assume that you'll probably fall into the same two camps, or maybe a third camp where it's somewhere in between. And I'm going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. And if not, I will be here for at least another hour, and then again this afternoon. Clients kind of get in the way of things. And we can, just grab me, and happy to chat or call or Twitter or whatever. So this is a little strange for me, because today I'm going to talk about process, and I'm not I wouldn't have said, 20 years ago that I'm a process guy, right? I'm kind of actually feel like I'm anti that. And, we'll see how this goes. But, in some cases, process kind of kills the mood. You can just ask my wife. So as Jake said, I've been a designer for 18-ish years, and I've seen a lot in the industry. It's really changed over the time. I got my degree in visual communications and photography, go figure. Lots of art history and philosophy and business administration to go with that. And somehow that led me to where I am today as a strategist at Blink. And really that just means I get to work on and run and be a part of some of our biggest, hardest, coolest projects. And that's pretty cool. So I want to start with a couple stories, though. I don't need to jump straight into it. And when I was 13, 14, my family moved from Bothell to Kent. Big transition there. It was. And we had a house, and in the backyard there were 3 apple trees. We never had apple trees. We had like a grass mound at our old house, but we didn't have apple trees. So my dad went and took a class on pruning fruit trees. And he went, and it was like an afternoon, and they learned how to prune fruit trees and what to do. And he came home, and he's like, "Byron, I want you to go prune the apple tree tomorrow after school." So I said, "All right, cool. What do I do?" He's like, "Cut everything that goes up." Cool. Okay. And so I did. I didn't really ask any other questions. I was 13. I didn't really care about the apple tree. And I definitely had other priorities. And so I went out and I pruned it. I cut everything that went up, except the trunk, which meant that I didn't leave much. And it meant that that tree didn't last very long. And so I guess what I learned out of that is that, there are definitely situations where things are going to be ambiguous, or that you might not know what you're doing, but it's probably a good thing to ask for clarification and to be transparent about that. And you don't have to be shy or concerned, or it doesn't have to be a scary conversation. You can just ask how or why or things like that. Speaking of expectations, I've got 2 kids. I've got a nanny that takes care of those kids. And she's been working with us for about 2 years. She's wonderful. She's amazing. She can't load the dishwasher to save her life. And I say that in the kindest, most gentle and loving way. If you load your dishwasher this way, I apologize. And so, it's a tough grapple, right? We've hired her to watch the kids, and the fact that she cleans up after snack and before dinner is a blessing. So I'm not going to complain too much about it. But I do laugh every time I come home, because me being the designer, I do things a little bit different. And that's okay, right? We all have our own ways of doing things. We have our own processes, right? And that's a good thing. The funny thing about process, though, as with anything in general, is that mine is obviously better than yours, right? And so I like to refer to this as my process and other people's process, or OPP. Let's see. All right, cool. It's playing. So I have a not-so-secret identity. I've spent the last 20 years-ish teaching skiing, snowboarding, telemark in the hills outside of Seattle, up Snoqualmie. And I've seen a lot. I've taught kids as young as 1.5 up to people that have never, ever skied and they're 72, 73 years old. I've worked with people from India and Japan that come on tour buses and they've never seen snow before, and I have to teach them how to ski. And it's an interesting game. It's an interesting process each time. Truth be told, any skiers, snowboarders? Cool. When did you learn? Did you learn as a kid or as an adult? So kids, did you learn as a kid? Learn as an adult? Cool. Like when you learn as a kid, like you forget all this stuff. I learned as an adult, and it was hard. And a lot of what you do as an instructor is try to make it safe for people, right? That I want you to be able to get up the chairlift and make it back down in one piece. And so there's a very set way to do that. There's a process for doing this. So just to kind of level set on process, right? So there is a process to learn how to ski. Like that first lesson, if you all remember, probably went the same for each of you, right? You try out your gear, you put one foot into your ski, you walk around, you put the other foot in. You walk and gradually build up to this process. And skiing and snowboarding, although different tools, the process is pretty simple. You start very slow, at a very basic piece, and you build up from there. Eventually, you go up the chairlift, and there's a lesson around that. I'm going to guess that most of the people in that last video skipped that part. As you move up, outside of that first lesson or the second lesson or the first year, second year, third year, it becomes a little trickier. You start having to analyze and understand where your students are at. And then you have this set of tools or set of activities that you can work from, right? I'm going to pick this and this and this for you to work on today in these conditions to gain that skill. So you have to get a little more creative. And in the professional world of teaching, any other ski and snowboard instructors in the audience here? I should just, cool, nobody can prove me wrong. They have something called the stepping stone. So this is put out by the Professional Ski Instructors Association of America. And it's this idea that you have all of these skills, all of these things that you need to work on, but you can do them out of order, that you can just jump from one to the other, kind of like you were crossing a stream. For snowboarding, they shape it like a martini glass or a brandy sniffer. I think it's because they're snowboarders. It's all right. It's cool. So, as you proceed, as you get further down the path, you just kind of keep honing that in. The real thing here is that all of this is created just to have a common vocabulary, right? So that I, as an instructor, can talk to another instructor as maybe I pass a kid along, or as I go to a gathering of other instructors. So we can be talking on the same language, right? So that I can say these three things, and they understand exactly what those mean. So as we move forward through this presentation, I want to think about process less as a line chart of how to get from one point to another point, but more as a common vocabulary that we can all use to talk about design and product and things like that. So in the design space, in the product space, in the business space, these are three processes, vocabularies that are, I'll say a couple are popular right now and a couple aren't. We have waterfall, agile, and lean, which I like to refer to as waterfall agilean. It's much easier to say, not really. And they're really vocabularies, things that we can talk to, right? Waterfall means certain things, right? It's very structured. You do one and then the next and then the next. Agile, you just kind of throw it all in a bucket and mix it up. And lean, you kind of half-ass it and get it out the door, right? Am I wrong? Okay. Across the bottom, we have these design vocabularies, right? UCD and design thinking, right? Well, I'll say, yes, we do UCD, or can you come do a design thinking workshop for me? Sure. You know, and so it's about how do we have the same vocabulary? How do we talk about these things, these buckets, these words across the industry? Yep. And I guess, yeah, I'll start here. There's a time and a place for each of them. And you know, maybe there's a bad tone to waterfall these days, but I will be the first one to say that I think it's a very valid process for the right time and place in a product's life cycle. Same with agile and lean and kind of whatever else you dream up. Back in the day, well before I was born, surprise, I would argue that when they were first building the first airplanes or the first vehicles of flight, it was a very agile and lean process. They, in the words of Mark Zuckerberg, moved fast and broke things, literally. Planes, bones, you name it, as they fell from the sky, right? It was design, iterate, test, design, iterate, test. Get it going, get it going, get it going, try, try, try again. And that worked for that product in that time, in that space. If you told me that's what they were doing here, I'd be a little concerned, right? Boeing is not an agile, focused environment. They do agile development in small buckets and in areas and teams. But when you look at the product as an end-to-end process, it is absolutely waterfall, and that's a good thing. So over the years, I've drawn some of these. I'm sure you have too. We talk about process in so many different ways. We try to come up with diagrams to communicate this, be it to executives or to stakeholders or to potential clients, to say this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it. And we're all going to live in harmony and it's going to work perfectly every single time, like a cookie cutter. It's not usually true, though. But what I will say is that if I boil these down, that they all kind of contain the same three areas, and that is strategy and design and build. And these really do happen in succession, right? It is a waterfall process, and that's okay. It should be, and it's a good thing that it is. So inside of strategy, these are I just threw some words in here. There's tons of other things that go into strategy, so don't take that. But the idea is here that we're going to go phrase the problem. We're going to talk to people. We're going to talk to people in the business. We're going to talk to people that are using our products. We're going to look at products maybe that surround us. We're going to do a competitive analysis. We're going to understand where we fall and what we're trying to look at. And from that, we're going to come up with a hypothesis or an idea and some business requirements, right? And until we have those two things, we can't move on. Right? We have to have those two things before we move on. We have to kind of know what we're looking at doing. This is a process that could take an afternoon, and it's a process that could take 3 months or longer, as you're trying to understand what's happening. And again, that goes to, what are you trying to solve? What's the problem at hand? Design is not just from a visual standpoint. So I, as a designer with an art background, I say design and I mean certain things. However, I have also been a developer and worked within the development community, and I understand that there's more to design than design, that there is systems design, application design, system architecture, and all of that has to happen as part of design, maybe just in different tracks. Right? So while a group of people are looking at that solution hypothesis and understanding the business requirements and applying that to, say, interaction design and user flows and business process and systems and visual design, there's a whole other group of people that are trying to build the systems and infrastructure and design the infrastructure to support that, especially if it's kind of coming from the ground up or if there are any changes that need to be made. And similarly, once you move into the build phase, my job as a designer is not done because I still have to carry that through the finish line. It's kind of swaps a little bit. So the development process takes on a little bit more prominence. It becomes a little bit more active. And then the role of design becomes more of a support role, where they are carrying things through to the end. They're there for design validations and checks, a little bit of QA and support. But that's not to be said that there is kind of this future of design where, jumping in and doing some code as a designer is perfectly fine. Building out CSS and, bootstrap, CSS templates, that's a pretty standard deliverable these days, and that's a good thing. How do I take this to that next level? So when we think about design process, this was originally done by Damian Newman from Central Story. And his story is that he was having lunch with a potential client one day, and they said, so tell me, what's your process? How do you solve things? And he grabbed a napkin and drew this, just like all great startup ideas. But I thought it was wonderful, right? It's a way to show that it is a blurry, fuzzy process as you are trying to narrow down your solution. That as you cycle this process, sometimes it's forward, sometimes you move back, and that's real, that's okay. And then eventually, as you come out of strategy into design and ultimately into development, that process hones down. It becomes much more linear and pointed, and you have a direction on where you want to go. So back to those fancy process diagrams. This is my rough one for the morning. It kind of says the same thing. But the idea here is that strategy is absolutely an arc that comes down. And as you narrow into that, you go into a circular design process, right? Where you're iterating and testing and prototyping and learning and doing it again until everybody decides that you're done, that you're ready, that you can, I'm going to use the word commit to production, but that doesn't mean the technical dev term. That means that we're going to move this out of design and officially into a formal dev environment, right? That we're going to prepare this to launch to a customer, and that's that. So in essence, though, I'd like to look at this entire process as design. It's really product design, where we're taking this idea and taking it all the way through launch. And it's incredibly important for designers, and I meant to ask earlier, who all is a designer in the audience? Shit. Okay. So developer? Okay. It's okay, it's good. You're welcome here. Any product people? Business people? All right, awesome. Cool. So I'll say that it's really important for design to be included throughout the entire process, right? That it's an end-to-end, that the more earlier, is that a term? The earlier that the design can be involved in this end-to-end process, and the longer that they can stay involved in the process, the better the product's going to be at the end of the day. That holds true, though, for everyone on the project. It's not just design. I would argue that development should also be included in the requirements gathering and strategy process. And product, of course, should absolutely be included throughout the entire process representing the business. It is imperative that we look at this as a three-legged stool. This is not individual silos. That goes back to kind of waterfall, right? And that's where I'd say it fails, right? It's not about tossing something over the fence from me to you to catch and run with. It's not a relay race. It's, I don't know, it's a Tough Mudder, right? You're all in this together and running, right? And we got to get to the finish line together as a team. And that, I think, is pretty important. So let's talk about solving problems. Years ago, I was working for a small consulting firm, and the sales team, otherwise known as the CEO, would go out and drive new business. And he would sell great projects. But sometimes he would write into the statement of work, we all know what that is, right? That there would be some X number of wireframes. Right? 3 wireframes, 15 wireframes. And he'd just kind of pull these out of his pocket, right? I don't know. It's going to be this, which is fine for the most part, right? I mean, all of you designers out there, you can tease out some design to pretty much fit into any number of wireframes. That's no big deal. The problem came when we started arguing about this concept of gold plating or over delivering. It's like, well, I said there was only going to be 3 wireframes, so you can't deliver 10. Like, well, we said it was only going to be 2 weeks, and I did it in a week, so maybe we're okay. And you start having these hard conversations. You're like, it doesn't have to be quantifiable by some given set of wireframes. Thankfully, the industry as a whole has walked away from that, so that's a good thing. But I still feel that we're pretty focused on these concepts of deliverables or as outputs, and that's okay. Right? It is a business world, and when I am from an agency standpoint, right? So I work with clients, and we have to have statements of work, and we have to track, to some amount of money, and the best and easiest way to do that is through a physical deliverable, right? It's like, here is your, design documentation, 173 pages, fully documented. Check, we get paid, right? It's a pretty known process, but I think it's a flawed process. Because that is separating this line. That is saying that you are an agency and therefore you are over here, and we are the team and we are over here. And I think that there's a better way that we can work seamlessly together, where outputs and deliverables are still done as a way to move the team forward, but they are not tied to payment milestones. Right? And that's a tougher position to be in. And thankfully, there are many clients out there today that I'm working with that are doing this. What we end up doing is, going to a model of time and materials, right? It has good connotations and bad, right? We don't want to be thought of as just plug and play staff augmentation, because it's more than that. But that there is this world where we're going to say, we're going to look at this project, we're going to put X number of people on it for a period of time, and that's kind of equal to what we're going to charge for that project. It's a little bit of, how that's all done. We'll still end up doing those deliverables. And we might even list those out in a statement of work. We're going to say, okay, we're going to do these 10 things, or maybe we're going to look at these types of activities in this part of the process. But we need to be able to change that, right? We need to be agile. We need to be able to modify that as we go. And because maybe as I'm working through a project or working on this one chunk of a project, I need to do these 5 things. Like, I need to storyboard this, I'm going to put some user flows in place, and then I'm going to do some rough wireframes. And I'm going to do full fidelity visual comps at the end, so they know exactly what they're getting. But the second time we go back and work with that same team on a slightly different version of that project, do we have to do all of those same outputs exactly like we did them last time? And I would argue that you don't, so long as the team doesn't need it, right? So if the team is moving at momentum, then maybe you can do less, right? You can rough in the storyboard a little bit more and just leave it on a whiteboard. That you can do your wireframes and maybe focus on those rather than the full fidelity mock-ups that take it to the nth degree. And again, that's all kind of plug and play depending on the team that you're working with and the problem you're trying to solve. It's like going back to skiing, right? Different days, different conditions, different feelings. Did they wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Is going to dictate how that lesson goes. And the same goes for projects. It could be the same people, the same exact people working on a given project, but because of the problem or because of how it's going, that they need to adjust that process. And I think that that's an important piece here, that just because we've documented a process or that we've said this is what we're going to do, that we need to be clear and transparent and have the conversation that that's okay to change. Having that conversation up front is easier than having it later down the path. So if we go to, like, say, the lean UX process, Jeff Gothelf, I think, is that how you say it? Anyway, he talks about it this way, removing waste from the design process by shifting from obsessively documented hands-off to a process that creates only design elements needed to move the team forward. And I really hold on to this. I think that this is important. And as long as this is your guiding light, that I'm going to do things on a given project that's going to move the team forward, and that may change, is okay. And I need to keep that top of mind. And the team needs to keep that top of mind. It's my job as a strategist, running and overseeing projects, to ask that question along the way, right? To say, do we need to continue doing this? And maybe I'll say, I think we do, because I heard from the client or I heard from this that they still don't understand it. But the team also needs to come, and the client can come and say, you know what, I don't think we need that anymore. I think we're good. Or I don't quite understand this. Maybe we should be looking at it from this way. And constantly being able to adjust is important. Have you ever watched a flock of birds fly? Do they fly straight? Never, right? They're constantly, like, they just jumble all over the mountain, or all over the mountain. That was me and my group of snowboarders jumbling all over the mountain. Flocks of birds, just, the leader is just flying along, and everybody else is just on point, following them and flying behind them, right? It's an agile process. So a couple examples, and I'm going to dive into, a good chunk of this presentation is going to be some case studies. But just to help illustrate this process, or these concepts, here's an example of some wireframes from several years ago. I may or may not have drawn them. The idea that there's phases or levels of fidelity, we all know this, right? So there's sketch base. I can just draw this on my notepad or a whiteboard, and sometimes that's good enough. Usually, if it's just you or a very small team, right? Sometimes you have to open that up a little bit. You have to formalize those, usually if it's a little bit larger team or a more complex process. And then sometimes you have to go to the nth detail and document them to, yikes. Same goes for storyboarding. How many people storyboard? I think it's the greatest tool in the universe. And this one I did draw. I'm a horrible drawer. I have an arts degree, but I can't draw worth shit. But it gets the idea across. But you can take that to another level, right? You can add color. You can give it a little bit more life, a little more impact. And likewise, you can start adding in wireframes or real-life situations or scenarios, right? There's lots of different ways to do this, and that all maps back to where is it going. If I'm just sketching something in my horrible sketching skills, that's fine for the team or for me to reference later on. But if that has to go up to an executive team and be sold to a larger group of people, then that needs to be a little bit more. And if that's going up to an executive of a global credit card company, it needs to be a little bit more, right? Oh, back to stories. A couple of weeks ago, I was having coffee with an old boss of mine. She's a traditional creative director. She came out of visual communications, and she was. We were chatting, and she's like, Byron, I've been reading up, and I'm leaning and moving into this UX space. I'm moving out of that pure visual communications world and experimenting in this new area. And she's like, but man, it seems like a lot of work. Like, do you really have to do all of that? Like, do you ever cut corners? And I was like, whoa, how do I answer that? I don't think you cut corners. I would never say that. But I would say that doing this process may sometimes appear as though we're cutting corners, right? That if I don't take this to the nth degree every single time, am I cutting corners or am I delivering per what the project needs? And I think that's a tough balance to have, and being able to communicate that and being willing to change that is an important part of this process. So in short, don't half-ass it, full-ass it. You can thank my buddy Carl for that quote. So with these we've got like 15 minutes just on a time check. I'm going to walk through a couple of sample projects. These are from a couple years ago. And hopefully this just helps illustrate when and where and how to use some of these pieces. And we'll go from there. So this was a mobile app designed for iPhone and Windows Phone 7 when Windows Phone 7 just launched. And the premise behind it was that it was a healthcare app. And part of the sales process in this one, which was a lot of fun, was they came to us with a problem, and they said, we need two apps. One that is helps you find the version of Robitussin that you need. Anybody have a hard time figuring out which version of Robitussin you need? Yeah, there's an app for it. I may have worked on it. And then the idea that people typically didn't complete the recommended dosage of Robitussin, thus leaving product on the shelf because they wouldn't go buy a new bottle the next time they needed it. So they wanted a little digital, what are those pill checkers, like the little pill dispensers, to say, hey, you should take your dose of Robitussin, and again, and again, and again, through the doctor's recommended dosage. So in part of this process, we kind of pulled together this story to help illustrate what we were trying to do. It's always fun to tell stories. So the daycare just called. Jimmy is sick. Mom's out of town for the week. She's at a conference. Dad's on point. He's got a crazy week at work, and he just got that call. He picks him up. He heads to the grocery store. He's like, oh, shit, what do I do? And if only there was an app for this, right? Which one do I get? How do I get it? Where do I go? Turns out there is. Yay, Windows Phone 7. This was a pretty crazy project, as they typically are sometimes, right? We had like 6 weeks total to work on this. We got a call Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, we had a signed statement of work, and we started the process, which meant I got to work the weekend. So over the course of that weekend, we did our strategy. What are we trying to solve? What are we trying to do? We ran to the store. We talked to as many parents and people that we could talk to that had been through this process, right? We gathered as much information as we could, as nimbly as we could, right? We had kind of did a SWAT team style for this project, right? It was me, a junior interaction designer, and a developer, and that was it. And we dove in from day one. We worked all weekend together. We went and did all the visits together, and we sat right next to each other, kind of. The developer sat right behind me. Through the design process, we did the application architecture. That's what the developer was working on. He knew what we were trying to solve for, and he was trying to get that all put together. Windows Phone 7 was brand new. It wasn't even technically out yet, meaning the phone hadn't actually hit the ground yet, but the software had. So he was busy ramping up on that, trying to figure out how it's going to work, what do we need to account for, while we were trying to solve for the user needs. And then we built it. Right? We designed it and built it. When we talk about deliverables or outputs, those are the various activities or things that we did, but these are the ones that we showed the client. Right? This is what we kind of provided as guidance along the way. Right? What's the hypothesis? What's kind of an initial stab at what this app is going to be? Those are just handwritten or hand-drawn, thrown in a PowerPoint and sent over, and we presented it. Full fidelity screens, we did provide those. We did do a design review. We did take time to do those types of things. And then the native build. And of course, they got releases along the way, got to check progress and things like that. So from a process standpoint or a timeline standpoint, it looked kind of like this. Strategy was the weekend. Design was about 2 weeks. Development overlapped that. Official development overlapped that by a week. And I'm going to separate out when they were learning and designing the system and architecture as part of the design process versus when they actually dove into code building the app as the development process. We did this over the course of 3 weeks. I said 6 weeks earlier, but it was actually 3 weeks. We got an extension. At the end of the 2 weeks, we sent them the Windows Phone 7 build. They loved it so much, they said, can you do a version on iOS? That was the next 3 weeks. Interesting thing about this, there was really never a design development handoff. Like, we were working so fast and we were working together, and the fact that the developer was sitting right behind me and I had this huge monitor, he was building it off of my screen as I was going. And at the end of that first week of official build, I walked by his desk and I'm like, shit, look at that. Like, that's that's real. Like you're doing that, and I haven't officially given you anything yet. And at the end of the day, we ended up tweaking some stuff and reworking a couple fonts and providing some new images and backgrounds and things like that. But that was the process. It was pretty quick. And there's the iOS version. Similarly, so starting off with a couple of really small projects. Similarly, I worked on an Apple Watch app. This was, again, before the release of the watch. I can say that now. And we'd been chosen to come down and be a part of an Apple Watch workshop. So in order to do that, we had to come up with an idea. We had to tell a story again. So we said, okay, well, here's our story. So we put together a quick PowerPoint. It's kind of a little sales pitch. So here's our story. And that was our solution hypothesis, right? We had done a little bit of research. We kind of knew the industry and what we were trying to solve for. And we said, well, watch apps are supposed to be pretty lightweight, pretty thin. So let's just do these couple of things, right? That process looked kind of like this, right? Here's what the watch is. Here are some of the core capabilities of the watch. Here are the core capabilities of Urban Spoon, which is where I was at the time. And here's this gap between those two that we felt we could solve for. And this was an hour session, the executive team pounding this out. That then went into watch research, right? Again, the watch wasn't out yet, but we knew certain things about it by watching that video of Johnny Ive over and over and over again, right? That it was supposed to be personal, that it was supposed to be holistic, and that it was supposed to be lightweight. So we started drawing app architecture. What's this going to look like? How's the system going to support that? And eventually, some other very horrible wireframes. And I'm going to jump this one. And then that went straight into full fidelity mockups. Right? We had the Apple HIG. We knew what it was supposed to look like. We knew that they didn't want us to deviate from that pretty much. So it made it pretty easy to just say, let's just put it together. Right? We don't need to dive into this overcomplicated process. Right? But we did design it for every screen. And over the course of 2.5 days, I designed all of those screens, and our developer built the entire mini watch application. It was pretty quick. So that's 2 projects, very small, right? Kind of see how that process works. This one wasn't so small. This was the larger rebrand at Urban Spoon. The watch was just one little piece of it. This was anybody go to Jared's session yesterday on Big Bang? It was great. This was a big bang. You shouldn't do them. That was his lesson. It's my lesson too. But sometimes you have to. And this was a big bang. It was a whole new rebrand, a whole new replatform. We were building stuff up from the ground. So what does that look like? I'm going to jump through because we are getting short on time. We did a lot. We did a lot. And this is kind of what that process looked like. We were stair-stepping. We had multiple teams running in parallel. We did strategy, we did design, and we did development. We did that in different orientations depending on the team that we were working with. So it was me and 2 other designers. It was 2 project managers. And then it was 2 iOS developers, 2 Android developers, 5 front-end developers, and 5 back-end developers. And at some point, we were all working on the various different things. The APIs were being consumed by all of the applications, and all of the various teams were working independently. Those different teams had different personalities and needed different outputs or different processes to work with them. The iOS team always needed everything designed to the T, every single screen, every single interaction, in order for them to proceed and move forward. The Android team didn't give a shit. They just went, right? I don't know if that says anything about Android and iOS developers. The web team, they were so lock and step. We provided them with kind of a new style sheet, a new style guide, and they had the most beautiful system for making those updates. It was very, very seamless. So I hear that I have like 5 minutes left, so I'm going to jump ahead. So I warned the individual that this quote would be up here. This is one of my clients. He might be sitting in the back row, so be kind. This was a wonderful quote. We were on a call about 2 weeks ago, and we were going through the designs, right? This is classic design direction. We have 3 designs. They look slightly different. We are kind of debating which ones we like. You know, I like that one. You like this one. We kind of narrow it down. 1 drops off. We've got 2 left. And he drops this little bomb, right? That was like, option 1 solves the problem, but I like option 2 better. You know, and I thought it was such a wonderful little statement, right? That there is a line in the sand that we have to draw. And at some point, you have to say, we have to go with this one. And although option 2 maybe was a little nicer or a little prettier or had some other little icons, option 1 solved the problem in an elegant manner. And that's okay, right? The option 2 can come later, or we can add those pieces of delight later. But once we've solved the problem, and it's delightful, right? It's not about half-assing it. It's still a good solution. We don't have to go to 10. 9 is okay. How do I get out of this? There we go. So in the words of Mike Monteiro, who wrote Design is a Job, who's read it? The rest of you should. I'd rather have a good designer who can present well than a great designer who can't. Then it could also be said, I'd rather have a live product that looks good than a dead product that looked great. So with that, we have like 2 minutes, a minute and a half, a minute and 10 seconds. Happy to answer questions or any question or whatever, or just grab me outside. Any quick questions?
Yeah, hopefully it's quick. I work in the agency side as well, and I'm curious, much through your process, the same things we work on, the collaboration is all great between the teams. How do you manage, and how does your team manage client feedback, and especially the one example you gave me, like straight to full fidelity deliverables?
Yeah.
At that point, you've got 1 week, the export already started somewhere.
It's just go time. Yeah.
So how do you guys manage those changes or those wishes if you start to get more full fidelity requirements?
You know, it's a mixed bag. For that and for all the projects where that I'm on, I try to be very upfront from day one. That says, look, based on the timeline, we're going to have to move fast, or we're going to have to do this, and that's going to, bring in some levels of risk, and that some changes may or may not be able to happen. And I think it's just about being honest and communicating, and that's what I feel at least. That the more I can communicate, the more honest and transparent I can be about those communications, the less loaded I can make those conversations, that it's actually just a conversation then, right? So when we jump straight to high fidelity mock-ups, I say, we can't really go back and re-engineer the process, right? Because we've already done that. And, in that project, I made the decision to do that because I knew that we were on a timeline, and I had to make some big assumptions, and I had to make some big risks, in order to get there. In other projects, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Like if I was, say, building a large system for a financial institute, I wouldn't take a big risk like that.
Are you communicating with the client, or do you have account services doing that with your instead of you?
That's me. I wouldn't trust account services. Good, I think she left. Okay. No, I prefer to communicate that. I think it comes better from that relationship.
On these very aggressive timelines, do you ever do any user testing, user research, or just kind of go with that preliminary research findings? And then?
It depends. I think it depends. So like in the case of that Pfizer app, we did user testing with whoever was available, right? So it's like, if you're not on the project, I'm going to grab you and I'm going to ask you to run through this real quick, right? Because it was so short, so fast. On some of the Urban Spoon stuff and some of the stuff that I do currently, it's much more formal, right? Where we're going to design some interactions, we're going to put those into a prototype, and then we're going to bring in people and do actual usability testing so that we can iterate and test on that, or iterate and design on that. And I think that that's a part of the process. Again, determining at what level and what fidelity early in the project, and doing that as a team, and being a part of that process and saying, look, this is what we're going to do. Here's the timeline. Here's what we're going to do. That's going to mean that we're going to do this type of testing, and that's going to provide this type of output or recommendation, and then having a conversation around that, right? If that's not enough or it doesn't meet the needs of their business, then we have to rejig that and maybe rejig the plan or relook at some other stuff, right? It's kind of this constantly moving those stones, the hats.
So in your diagrams, as you're showing where design ends and development is happening,
Yeah.
what's your role in those projects after design ends?
What's my role or a designer's role?
The designer's role.
So to me, designers move into the build process, right? And so that becomes more of a support role, right? Where they are providing assets, providing style guides, making changes. So like, I mean, has any project ever gone smoothly once it goes into development, right? Things always change, always, right? So having that person there to be able to provide an input on how to make those changes, right? Not that I don't trust developers, I love them, but you know, they're working on how do I get this built and out the door in a certain manner, and that designer is there to kind of be the stand-in for the client, the advocate, and needs to be a part of that process so they can help make those decisions and guidance, right, with new parameters. Jake?
I'm wondering if, considering the time, we could, if people still have questions, you could come up with, I think you'll
I'll be here.
answer a few up front, but we can
Yep.
allow the group to disperse if they want to.
Good call.